Hey everybody, I hope you enjoyed our last talk that we did on um we did on what is pH and how pH affects your vaginal health. I hope you enjoyed that. And so now what we're going to do is get into the next section on our booklet on vaginal steaming and infection and talk about vaginal discharge. And different what colors your discharge should be, and if any type of vaginal fluid that you may have coming out, what that may indicate that's going on with you at that point in time. So we'll go ahead and dive right into it, okay? So it is very common to wonder whether the color or the consistency of vaginal discharge is normal or it's just healthy. Vaginal discharge can be many colors, and several different colors indicate a healthy and may indicate a healthy body. That's what some people do not understand. Just because you're having vaginal lubrication or there's a little bit of vaginal discharge you may have at different points in time, that doesn't indicate that there is a problem going on at all. Vaginal discharge or vaginal fluid is secreted from the glands in the vagina and the cervix every single day. Yes, every day, to remove old cells and debris, keeping the vagina and the reproductive tract nice and healthy. So the amount of vaginal discharge you may have varies from person to person and changes depending on where the person is in their menstrual cycle. Now, I like to educate people that the menstrual cycle does not mean your period. Your period is only day one and one stage of the 4 stages of your menstrual cycle. In simple terms, without going into a lot of biology, your menstrual cycle consists of your period, then your pre-ovulation, then your ovulation stage, and then your pre-period stage. So during those 4 stages, that completes one full menstrual cycle. At different points in the menstrual cycle, you may experience a different change in your vaginal fluid or your or what we call discharge. I don't like to say the word discharge because typically when I talk about discharge, that means negative vaginal fluid instead of just your daily vaginal fluid. And so you may hear me just say the word vaginal fluids interchangeably, or I may use the term discharge since that's what's notably used out in the public. But typically, whenever we refer to it as discharge, that means something bad is going on. Other than that, that's just your normal vaginal fluid. So getting back into the menstrual cycle, and how it changes at different points in your how your vaginal fluid changes at different points in your menstrual cycle. Typically, during day one or the first week of your menstrual cycle, your period is going to be on. And that's when your vaginal fluid or your vaginal leakage is going to be red because that indicates that your period is on. And then after that, your fluid should change to a thin, slippery. I tell women it's the consistency of raw egg whites. If you were to crack an egg and take the yellow away from it and you just have the translucent egg white before it is cooked, that's what the consistency of your vaginal discharge that should look like. It should just be thin, slippery, and more of a translucent color. Now, as we get closer to our ovulation stage, it becomes more white. Some people will notice that it gets cloudy, but it gets a little more whiter instead of more clear or transparent in consistency. And typically that indicates ovulation. And then after ovulation, it goes back to how it was pre-ovulation. So it goes back to how it was after your period went off. And then prior to your period, you may notice that you're just not as lubricated as you were the week before during ovulation, or right after ovulation, or right before ovulation. Typically, it can be 3 to 5 days before your period. You're just not going to be as lubricated as you're normally used to being. And that's not uncommon or extremely unhealthy. That's just a natural of what's going on in our bodies during that time. It's a lot of biology behind it that I won't go into right now, but that's just the nature of what's going on in our bodies around that time of the month when you're at your pre-period stage preparing for your period to come on. Now, if you're dealing with dryness every stage of your menstrual cycle, whether it's doing your pre-ovulation, your ovulation, and your post-ovulation, also known as your pre-period, then that's something that we can discuss, and you should set up a consultation with me. But other than that, you should be perfectly fine. So now we're going to go in and talk about different colors of your vaginal fluids and what that could indicate. So the first color we're going to talk about is red. So whenever we see red vaginal fluids or red leakage, it can be a dark red or it can be a bright red, but red is most commonly associated with bleeding during the period. That means some blood flow is happening. Your menstrual period happens on average every 28 to 30 days on average. Some people may go a little shorter, some people may go a little longer, but a nice healthy menstrual period is every 28 to 30 days and typically lasts between 3 and 5 days. So we all know when we are on our period, and I don't have to go into a lot of information about that, but that's some information. That's what goes on when you typically see red vaginal fluids. Anytime someone is bleeding in between periods, so that means that they are not on their period and they're bleeding, they should definitely see a doctor, because this can be a sign of an infection going on, some polyps, some cysts, endometriosis, fibroids, or even cancer. So if you notice that yourself, your loved one, or anyone that you have been talking to, a friend, is just saying, oh my God, I'm just bleeding all the time, and it's just not around the time of their period, then we should talk. You should have urged her to see her, to make an appointment to see her doctor, because that is a sign that something may be going on. Also, women who have also gone through menopause and have not had a period for at least 1 year should see a doctor if they begin seeing vaginal bleeding, because that can sometimes be an early sign of endometrial or cervical cancer. So that's an early detection of cancer. If you're through with menopause, you haven't seen a period in over a year, and all of a sudden you're having spotting or some bleeding going on, that's an early sign of menopause. That's an early sign of a form of cervical or endometrial cancer. And so these women should definitely see an OBGYN immediately to see what steps can be taken about that. So that's a little bit about red vaginal discharge. We all know what that means. That just means that some bleeding is going on, and it could indicate a problem depending on if you're menopausal, or if you have fibroids or endometriosis and wasn't aware, or it could just be your period. So that's a little bit about red. So that's all I have to say about red vaginal discharge or menstrual bleeding in essence. The next, we're going to talk about white vaginal discharge. So the shade of white can extend and include a cream color or a very, very light yellow. So if a person has no other symptoms other than the white discharge, that's a sign of healthy lubrication. I touched on this a little bit before earlier when I talked about doing your ovulation. It may change to a white thick color rather than a thin slippery consistency. As long as it's not thick, clumpy, and have an odor that's common with cottage cheese, or it seems yeasty, it's not a yeast infection. That's just your natural vaginal fluids. I always caution people about the light yellow tint, because as we're going to talk about when we go into talking to the next color, light yellow can indicate anything that you're eating in your diet, and it can cause your vaginal discharge to become tinted. However, as it gets to a dark yellow, that indicates a problem. So if it's just a little tint of yellow, but there's no odor, there's no clumpy, there's nothing going on besides that, and it's just a nice consistency, that's perfectly fine. However, again, if you see white discharge and it has the consistency of cottage cheese and a strong odor, that's usually associated with a yeast infection. And another thing, if you have that white, thick, clumpy discharge and you also have discomfort or redness around the vagina, or it's very itchy, that's indication of a yeast infection. So that's just some things to talk about when it comes to white vaginal discharge. It could be healthy or it could not, depending on the consistency, the odor, and everything like that. So So that's all I have to say about white vaginal discharge. Going further into yellow-green vaginal discharge. I already told you if it's a slight yellow hue, that may not indicate a problem because it could be just something you ate in your diet, or if you take some supplements, or you take taking some dietary supplements or some type of minerals. Some of them can cause our vaginal discharge to be a little slight hue. But if this hue is a deep yellow, or a darker shade of yellow, or a little bit of yellow greenish, that's usually sign of a bacterial infection or a sexually transmitted infection, and you probably should go see the doctor immediately, because that's a sign of an STD, especially if it's accompanied by a strong odor and discomfort in the vagina. You definitely should make an appointment and see what is going on, because any type of yellow greenish or really dark yellow is a sign that there is a problem. Moving on to pink vaginal discharge. Anytime that there's a light or a much deeper pink in our lubrication, that's a sign that there's a little bit of blood up there. There's a sign that some spotting is going on. Now, with that being said, if it's around the time of your period and you're expecting your period to come on, then pink is fine, because that is, you're expecting it's your period coming on, and eventually it's going to get heavy, and then it's going to go back off again. However, it can also be a sign of implantation bleeding during early pregnancy. A lot of the times when people first get pregnant and the egg implants, they have a little bit of implantation bleeding, and they may see little light pink spotting. So just in case you are actively trying to get pregnant and you see that happening, just that may be a sign. But on the flip side of that, if you're already in early pregnancy, within your first trimester, and you're noticing constant spotting or anything, definitely consult with your gynecologist about that, because that could be sign that you may be threatening a miscarriage or something else is going on with the pregnancy, because we don't want to have a lot of bleeding going on or spotting with the pink while we're pregnant. Some people also reported to me that they spot a little bit after ovulation or during ovulation. I have looked up and I don't find a lot of information on this. With my clients, it's not that prevalent at all. It's very rare. But majority of my clients who say, "Oh, LaQuinta, I know I spot every month around ovulation. I know when I'm ovulating. I know when I just got finished ovulating because I spot." It's typically my clients who have fibroids or endometriosis. And so I always urge these clients who don't have fibroids or endometriosis to get checked if you have ovulatory spotting for those things. But if you already know you have these things, you have fibroids, endometriosis, PCOS, or anything like that, and you have this spotting, it's kind of indicative we already know what's causing that. Also, pink discharge after sex is really common, and that just means that small tears or irritation has happened to the cervix during sex. So you may have been a little too rough, or he may have been a little too rough, and that's what caused the little bit of pink discharge. It's not really like a lot of bleeding, but it's just like, oh, it's a little blood flow there. That could have just been minor tears that happened during sex. And so that could be a sign of that if it happens after sex. But I have dealt with clients who have minor spotting after sex, and they have fibroids or cysts, and it's contributed to them having fibroids or cysts. For some reason, sex irritates them and it causes them to bleed a little bit, but I can't say that it is very common. I only have a few clients who have reported that to me, but I just wanted to let everybody know that is a thing and that could potentially happen. Clear vaginal discharge. Moving on to that. So the most ordinary vaginal discharge or your vaginal lubrication is clear or whitish. It may be slippery or have the consistency of egg whites. This is clear vaginal discharge is very likely during sexual arousal. It's just a nice healthy lubrication. No odor, is thin, slippery, the exact consistency that we want our vaginal lubrication to be. And so that's what clear vaginal discharge is very, very healthy. Not to say that white discharge isn't healthy, because in our traditional Western medicine, white discharge could just be your ovulatory discharge, because during that time, like I already said, we get a little bit more thicker. Our fluids get a little bit more thicker and maybe a little bit more creamier during that time. But clear vaginal discharge is a great sign that we have a very, very healthy vagina and womb space. Last but not least, I want to talk about gray vaginal discharge. This is what we don't want to happen because we as women hate it. Gray vaginal discharge at any point in time is not healthy and is most commonly associated with bacterial vaginosis, or what we most commonly call BV, the fishy odor. So anytime you have the fishy odor and your discharge has a grayish tint to it, or look really gray instead of clear, then that's a sign that you have BV. Even though the telltale sign of BV is that fishy odor, gray discharge can also be a sign of it. Some people can mask the smell of BV with boric acid capsules, and they use that to say, oh, it's cleared up because the boric acid capsules work because the odor goes away. But sometimes the odor goes away and the grayish discharge is still there, which lets you know that the BV is not cleared up and that we should do more. So that is what I wanted to come to you guys this week and talk about. I wanted to talk to you about vaginal discharge, the different colors, and what the different colors could mean. So if you haven't already, make sure to like, send any comments in the bottom if you have any questions about any other color discharge, or maybe you had something that happened with you and you say, LaQuinta, well, I was dealing with a lot of spotting and my doctor said this was a thing. Definitely, let's chat in the comments. Let's have a conversation about that. I love chatting with you guys. So again, like, comment, and subscribe to this video. And in the next video, we're going to be talking about the 3 most common infections in America. Or I should say the 3 most common vaginal infections, because here at this channel, we're all about the vagina. And that is we're going to be talking about yeast infections, number 1, which we touched on briefly today. We're going to be talking about bacterial vaginosis, which is number 2, which we touched on today when we talked about that fishy odor and the gray discharge. And the other infection that we didn't mention today, but it could fall under the category of that greenish, yellowish color, is trichomoniasis, also known as trick. So make sure to subscribe to the channel so that YouTube will let you know when I upload a new video, so you can watch that one too. And as always, I'll see you next time, and make sure to visit her sacred place and get products that are made specifically for your sacred place. See you next time. Bye.